Welcome to Funny They Don't Look Jewish, where Judaism appears in the panels. Our purpose is to find characters, stories, and issues of comics that explore explicitly Jewish content. I'm Brandon Bernstein.
And I'm Henry Bernstein.
No relation.
In a world with very few Jewish superheroes, one hero's Jewish journey emerges even in the darkest nights. Join us as Brandon and Henry continue their discussion about Kate Kane, Batwoman.
All right, next we're on Detective Comics number 860, published in 2009. This is Go, Part 3, written by Greg Rucka. He's just writing all our Batwoman comics these days. Drawn by J.H. Williams III, colored by Dave Stewart, lettered by Todd Klein, and edited by Michael Siglain. So Go Part 3 is the third part of the origin, telling how Kate Kane became Batwoman. We actually talked about this earlier. Everything I told you about of getting kicked out of the military academy, her mother and sister being killed, all that happened in Go Parts 1 and 2. Here we are in Part 3. So we're starting on page 6. Kate Kane has been out beating some thugs wearing black leather as sort of a costume, but she doesn't really have a costume. She's just trying to somehow take her fight to the streets because she's no longer in the military, so she can't serve her country. She wants to find some way to gain vengeance for her lost family members.
Very reminiscent of early Bruce Wayne.
Totally reminiscent, right? The parallels are abundantly clear. So on page 6, we see Kate Kane back at home showering, cleaning up after the fight, and she's just sort of walking through her apartment. And on the fourth panel, as she's walking through, we see a little end table. And what is on the end table? 1, a Hanukkiyah. 2, Shabbat candlestick holders. And 3, this is not on the table, but actually above the table, there is a poster, a picture of the SEFIROT, the 10 Kabbalistic SEFIROT. This is amazing.
Brandon, what are the 10 Kabbalistic SEFIROT?
Oh, so happy to talk. Okay, so let's just, to make sure it's clear. In Judaism, there are many different mysticisms, right? Mysticism, essentially, different approaches to Judaism that either are looking at really how to communicate directly with, have access to God, or are sort of looking at these like secret esoteric meanings behind Torah and various texts. So there's a lot of different approaches to Jewish mysticism. The most popular form of Jewish mysticism is Kabbalah, which we discussed a little bit earlier. So Kabbalah really is centered on this foundational text that is likely written in the early 13th century called the Zohar, written by a guy, Moshe de Leon.
And there's legend that it was actually, within the story, there's like, that it was actually written by Shimon Bar Yochai.
Right, yeah. It's very common in Jewish texts that in order to gain authenticity, you claim that it was written much earlier than it was, because anyone older is closer to Sinai, to God, etc., right? And so this was not viewed as embellishment or being counterfeit or lying, right? This was viewed as a sort of respectable thing to do. So anyway, we've got this central text called the Zohar, and Kabbalah offers a system and a sort of way of understanding Judaism that really focuses on picturing God as being composed as 10 different emanations in our world, right? I don't want to get too lost into it, but basically the idea is God is infinite and unknowable and something called Ein Sof, or without end. And once God decides to create the world, God unfolds God's self into the world, and the way God appears in the world is through these 10 different sefirot, or emanations. We have these 10 different emanations, and basically it's a way of trying to reconcile the fact that God seems to behave in various different ways, right? God is both highly merciful, which becomes the sefira of chesed, or loving kindness or loyalty, and God also has this aspect of what's called din, or Gevurah, which is a sort of judgment or strength, right? And sort of like, how do you have a God that's both like very judging and also very loving? And so the idea is that they're all different aspects of God that activate at different times and are all interrelated with each other, and they make this cool sort of what is called either a Kabbalistic tree or some people argue it actually looks like a human being, right? So it's sort of a map of God and a map of the Godhead. And Kate Kane has a poster of this map of the Godhead in her apartment.
And, you know, it's not uncommon for Jews to have, we talked about this, for Jews, it's not uncommon for Jews to have their Hanukkiyah, even when it's not Hanukkah, out
Right.
in a cabinet or
A little
out.
Judaica show-off section.
Yeah, as you know, where we're recording right now, there's candlesticks behind us. There's our Hanukkiyah. There's Kiddush cups out.
Right.
Whether they're being used or not, when you have a Jewish home, sometimes you display your Judaica. Hers are next to her Shabbat candles. Whether she lights Shabbat candles every week or not, I don't know.
But she's ready to light them if she wants to.
And she has a poster of the Kabbalistic SEFIROT above, which means that she knows stuff.
Right, you don't get that unless you have some level of engagement or knowledge. Now, it's possible she just went on a birthright trip. She went to Tzfat. She met the guy who's like one of the artists in Tzfat and was like, that's cool, I'll buy that. But I don't think that's the case here, right?
Especially that all three are together. That's like her Jewish corner.
Totally.
You
It's
know.
100% her Jewish corner. It's amazing.
And I didn't notice it the first time around when you and I were doing research and you're like, Henry, what is above that, or what is on that table? And I said, oh, that's the Hanukkiyah. What is next to the Hanukkiyah? Are those Shabbat candlesticks?
Yes.
What are above the Shabbat? Those are the SEFIROT.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, like it's such a small panel. It's easy to miss, but if you notice it, it's just unbelievable. And this is actually just foreshadowing for something even more exciting that's going to happen, because a few pages later, her father, Jacob Kane, discovers her stolen weapons and tech, and rather than being upset with her, which he kind of is, he's like, you just stole from the government all these weapons, what are you doing here? He actually offers to help train and prepare her for her war on crime, and basically sends her to go meet and train with all these people. And Kate Kane spends 2 years traveling the globe, very reminiscent of Bruce Wayne, to train and learn self-defense and martial arts and all sorts of skills. She returns on page 12 to her stepmother's. We get to meet her stepmother, Catherine, I believe. She meets her stepmother, asks where dad is, goes and meets with dad, and they rush off.
Are they just lazy with names? Like, we have two Marthas in the DC universe, which
Right.
is not a very common name. We've got,
A Kate and a Catherine.
and a Catherine, like, who are, come on.
It's yeah, I don't know. It's very strange. Oh, by the way, I noticed also back on page 12 again, when Kate's talking to her mom, I don't know if we talked about this before, but her stepmom's response is, oh, Kate, we didn't think we'd see you until the High Holy Days.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, there's this really lovely, like, oh, the family gets together. And, like, right, for a lot of Jews, even if Rosh Hashanah is not a time to go to synagogue and pray, it's time to have a meal with your family.
Right, it was Rosh Hashanah
Right.
dinner.
Yeah, so it's amazing. Like, what a surprise.
Maybe Kate makes brisket and matzo balls and gefilte fish and all that stuff.
All
Yeah.
I want is bat brisket. That sounds amazing. So, page 14, Kate and her dad are back in Kate's apartment, and really lucky Kate. Like, she comes to the Kane family money if she's able to hold on to an apartment after not living in it for 2 years. So, Jacob shows off what he's got for her, all this new stuff, including a new costume, which is the Batwoman costume she's going to have. And Kate looks at it and she says, red and black, Gevurah, the pillar of severity, the colors of war. Kate is so knowledgeable that she knows that in Kabbalah, like, what I love about Kabbalah, Henry, is the fact that it's almost like taking a whole bunch of different series of symbols and overlaying them on top of each other, by which I mean the Sefirah of Gevurah, right, which is considered to be the pillar of severity, of judgment, of power, right, is associated with the color red, whereas Chesed is associated with the color of white. Now, Gevurah is also associated with the patriarch Isaac, while Chesed is associated with the patriarch Abraham. And what I love is that they all have these different symbolic meanings, and sometimes the way they interact, it's like the relationship between them on one level of symbols is the same as the relationship between the others. Like, it's so well chosen. Like, it's like the colors interact and you're like, but wait, those represent the people and those people interact in the same way. It's just amazing. Anyway, that's an aside. It's accurate that red is indeed the color of Gevurah. It's amazing and incredible. And they're emphasizing the fact that Gevurah is really about deen, judgment, and Gevurah literally comes from the word of like power and strength, right? It's God's strong side. And this is perfect because Batwoman is 100% Gevurah, right? That fact that she's so intense. We were talking earlier that she's kind of scary, just like Batman. And I wanted to point out, right? It's intense, forceful danger. It's on the edge of being evil, yet ultimately is not. And within, this is part of why I love Kabbalah, is that it's actually, it reminds me a lot in a weird way of comic books. It's a little bit mythological,
totally.
right? So all these Sefirot of God have dark, evil counterparts, right? That are called Sitra Achra, or the other side, right? And the idea is that there's this dark shadow side to the Godhead that can always sort of creep in. And of all the Sefirot, right, one above all the other 9 is most susceptible to Sitra Achra. Which one is that? Gevurah, because it's already leaning in that direction towards not evil, but like sort of like the use of power and being judgmental, right? That's already leading us towards darkness and towards evil. So I love that idea, right? That Batwoman is a superhero who represents Gevurah, because Batwoman and Batman both are the heroes who also lean closest towards being the darkest, right? Their methods are so questionable that they're almost bad guys,
right,
even though they're ultimately good guys. And that's what Gevurah does. I would argue the only better choice of any DC superhero to be Gevurah would be Hawkman, right? But like, ultimately, Batwoman, Batman is incredible.
I just want to say one more thing.
Oh, sure, yeah.
About this. Couple things you pointed out. One, you saw somewhere in an article that, and we laid it out, and I'll put this up on our Facebook page for this episode, that if you take some panels here where Batwoman is trying on her costume and you put them together,
Right, I believe it's pages 14 and 15 of the issue.
And there's a tree behind her, it could look like the Sefirot, and we'll put that up so you can see it.
Right.
Also, I was just wondering, Jacob Kane doesn't respond to her when she says that thing about Gevurah. He just says, so go ahead, try it on. Do you think he knows what she's talking about? Or do you think he's like, oh, she's talking about Kabbalah again, I'm tuned out, just try on the stupid thing?
Well, he picked the color scheme, so he has to have known that she was going to respond that way.
He knows she's into Kabbalah, he did a little research.
Right.
Even if he doesn't know about it, he knows.
I picture that probably they had conversations where they were sort of like debriefing and talking about things, and probably as they're talking military strategy and different things, she's bringing the Kabbalah in, so I imagine he probably just heard some of it and knows that those are the colors.
Great. Our next issue is Detective Comics 975. This is from the last couple of years. This is very recent.
Yeah.
A great run by James Tynion IV. He took over Detective Comics at Rebirth when another shift in the multiverse happened. They tried to fix a lot of stuff that was going on the last 5 or 6 years. And Detective Comics was a series that it was a team book, basically. Basically, Robin, Tim Drake, had the Bat family be sort of his X-Men. Yeah, the third Robin, sort of be his X-Men. They had a danger room, they had vehicles. You know, it was a great run. In it, Batwoman does something controversial. She steps over the line. She destroys Clayface, who was a villain, turned ally, turned villain again, and she basically shoots him in the head.
Right. I was going to say destroys is a bit of a euphemism, Henry. She kills him.
She kills him, which is a no-no in the Bat family. Batman, A, doesn't use guns. He does not kill. That's the line that he draws. At least
this version of continuity, because I feel like we've seen versions of Batman where killing is, maybe it's across all lines.
I mean, they're Bob Kane and Bill Finger were fast and loose in it within the 40s, and of course, obviously, like we said, as we mentioned in BVS, Batman v Superman, he kills a ton of people. Right. But in general, the rule with Batman is he does not cross that line no matter what. Joker's always trying to push him, go ahead, kill me, She crosses that line. A lot of it is pushed on by Jacob Kane. He kind of eggs her on because he's sort of the villain in this story.
Right.
So they sort of put her on trial with the Bat family.
Drawn by Alvaro Martinez, inked by Raul Fernandez, colored by Brad Anderson, lettered by Sal Cipriano, and edited by Chris Conroy. No relation, I presume, to Kevin Conroy, voice of Batman in the animated series.
That would be cool, though.
That'd be awesome.
So it starts out, we open up with a shovel digging into the earth and being thrown in the first 3 panels. Hand reaches the shovel, shovel digs in, earth is thrown. there's no way to not know that this is a funeral, and I think it is very clear it is Jewish funeral. Okay, so then we cut to the next panel, and Alfred says, "Come now, Master Bruce."
Right. So basically, we're at a Jewish funeral, right? And every mourner has this obligation to help bury the body, right? It's this mitzvah of burying the dead, ideally on the day that they die, or in modern times within 3 days after someone dies, right? And this is all rooted in Deuteronomy 21:23, where it basically says when, in this case it's because of a public execution, but when someone is killed, you don't leave their body hanging there, you bury them that same day. And so the rabbis take that and say that, like, you have to bury somebody. And in the Talmud, in a tractate called Moed Katan basically says that it's the public responsibility of the entire town to make sure that the dead is buried. And so one of the ways that we do that is, rather than leaving burial to professionals or strangers, everyone at a Jewish funeral takes a shovel and shovels a bit of dirt into the grave. And it's considered, right, like one of the biggest mitzvot that there is, because, well, by biggest I mean sort of like one of the most important, not
Greatest.
most important, but one of the greatest, because it's a kindness that can never be repaid, right? If I am burying someone, that person will never be able to do that honor for me. And so it's really huge. And so we just talked about this, but like, let's take a moment to let it sink in. Young Bruce Wayne shoveled some dirt. Batman is performing a mitzvah.
And not only a mitzvah, the most important mitzvah you can do, because it can never be repaid.
Right, like, amazing. Like, not only is the Jewish Batwoman doing this, right, but like Batman is doing this. Like, this is I feel like we have hit, when we talked about the goal of this podcast, this is in a certain way like pay dirt. This is the most amazing
No pun
thing.
intended.
Oh, fair. Oh, I can't even continue with my point now. Yep.
So Bruce here is participating in a Jewish ritual that is the most important mitzvah, and I'm wondering if Bruce knows that he's doing that, or if he's just doing what you do when you're at a cemetery, when you're at a funeral, because he's been there, and it seems like not so that it's been pretty recent. He seems to be about the age that he would have lost his parents. If he's just being there for his cousin, or if he realizes the importance of participating with this very Jewish mitzvah that can never be repaid fully. I don't know.
Right.
But either way, Batman participated in a very important mitzvah.
It's really incredible. It's amazing. And that's, for a lot of the issue, we then move on to a story that isn't really relevant for our conversation here today, although it's a great issue. You should find it and read the whole storyline. But on page 25 and 26, we actually return to the cemetery now years later, when an adult Kate Kane visits her mom's grave.
So Kate is at her mother's grave. She's looking at it. It says Gabrielle Kane with a Jewish star above it. It does not say a Hebrew name. It does not say a date of death in Hebrew calendar or an English calendar.
Now that part makes sense because, right, these comics are essentially meant to be, it always gets updated. Whatever date they would put, they'd have to change it, in 10 years from now, it wouldn't make as much sense. So, fine, no date makes sense.
But the thing that was initially frustrating to us was there are all these graves around with crosses on them. There's a few Jewish stars, and they seemed all lined up and all look the same. And if you've ever been to a Jewish cemetery, and I assume this is true of all cemeteries, but gravestones look all sorts of ways. So it seems to me this may be a military grave site.
Oh my gosh, that would make so much sense, yeah.
And she's at the beginning, she's given that flag that's folded in the way that's only for military, police, firemen, that kind of thing, because her mother was in the military. And I don't know if Jews are buried at military cemeteries or not, or if they have a separate section, but it would make sense that that's why she's not in just a Jewish cemetery, Jewish section. Yeah.
No, it's the only thing that makes sense, because I've been perplexed about what is this cemetery that has grave with a cross, grave with a cross, grave with a Star of David, grave with a cross. And I was very curious. Military cemetery makes so much sense. While we're here, Henry, I'd love to own in on a couple lines that are really important. We see a flashback of, in the top right corner of the page, of young Kate once again using the shovel, right? So we got to talk about Batman performing the mitzvah. Now we see Kate performing the mitzvah. And here's what she says. Ready? I remember taking the shovel. It was so clean, so polished. Dad wanted me to go first, but I couldn't move. I felt like putting the dirt on the grave would make it all real. And it was like losing you all over again. And like that, A, it's so moving to hear that. And B, yeah, completely. Like I think to a way that is kind of the point, is that burying, shoveling the dirt, yes, it's a kindness as we talked about, but actually participating and shoveling the dirt onto the casket, it is a way of making it real. It's a way of adding finality and letting you know that this person unfortunately is dead and gone. And, you know, having just been through this recently in December, I buried my father. You know, for me, being A, older than Kate was, and B, a rabbi, like I actually found it to be not cathartic, but like very, very powerful to engage in this ritual. And I recognize the ways that burying my father and shoveling that dirt made it very real. But it makes total sense to me that for a young child, the age that Kate is here, right, that she would be hesitating. And I just love that they talked about the psychological aspect of the shovel and how it would make it real and how it would rip open the pain again. And like I actually think that is the wisdom of the Jewish funeral. It might sound cruel, but it's not meant to be cruel. It's meant to just force someone to accept the unfortunate reality.
This is, in many ways, more explicitly Jewish than anything we've seen in this episode, and maybe even in previous episodes, with including a Jewish wedding and a bar mitzvah, for all the reasons we mentioned before about the mitzvah itself, and for the interpersonal feelings and humanity and hard stuff that you have to go through to do these kind of things, that Judaism honors and elevates. I mean, I'm obviously biased, but I think better than other communities that I've observed or participated in. Judaism knows how to do this thing the right way and in a way that is meaningful and powerful. And so that's why, for me, this was the most explicitly Jewish thing we looked at today.
Yeah, I love the fact that it's not this Jewish moment that is cliche or that is getting lip service to it. It's something real. And at the end of the day, not just Judaism, but all religion, I think, right? It's about answering life's big questions. And it's, well, trying to answer some of them, but it's also about responding to people in their most difficult times, right? Like religion exists to be able to help people through difficult times, like the loss of a loved one. And so to see someone mourning in a Jewish way, and also honestly to see someone reflecting back and talking about how that experience, like they didn't fully understand it or they didn't fully like it, I think wrestling with that, grappling with that is really part of the experience. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly, for me, it is the most surprising articulation of Judaism within a comic book panel that I've ever seen. It's never in a million years, if you asked me to think of, you know, the goal of this podcast, to think of explicit Jewish content within comic books, it would take me a while before I would point out and say, like, oh, sure, there's going to be a comic book showing you a Jewish funeral that doesn't treat it like a big deal, but, like, understands the psychology of it. Like, wow.
And, Brandon, real quick, I collect Detective Comics monthly, and I read this issue, loved this whole story, blew right by it.
Right. If you didn't know you were looking for it, right, you would have just, like, flown right past it. Yeah, it's so subtle in the way that it's woven into the narrative, and I think that's what's kind of incredible, and part of what I love about it is that it's not calling attention to itself. It's not ostentatiously saying, look at this Jewish thing. It's just a Jewish thing that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's great. Did you want to say anything about the end there?
At the end, Jacob Kane is waiting for his daughter. There's a really nice panel. She puts her hand on the grave. She says, I'll make you proud, Mama. She starts walking through the gravesite. This is where we see a few other gravestones that do have Jewish stars. And Jacob says, it's good of you to come on the anniversary. And she says, Kate says, you should talk to her. And Jacob says, I probably should. And then they have a conversation about the sort of the subject of the issue. And I wondered, is he's clearly knowledgeable in his daughter's religion and his deceased wife's religion. Is he, when he says the anniversary, is he referring to the Yartzeit, the Jewish anniversary, the Jewish day of the calendar, 25th of Kislev, let's say, whatever, or is he talking about, December 21st, 1985?
Right.
That's what I wondered. Is he that knowledgeable and that cued into his daughter's obvious at this point ritual practice that he knows it's the Yartzeit and she's there to say Kaddish because it's the Yartzeit, or is it just the English anniversary of death? I don't know.
I don't know if it really. I mean, it's a curious question. On the one hand, if it's the Yartzeit, maybe that's why he's like, I probably should, because it's like maybe the Yartzeit anniversary doesn't mean as much to him, but he recognizes it means to her. On the other hand, maybe he's just uncomfortable with visiting his wife who died, his first wife who died. But what moments to be able to see? And at this point, Henry, we would think we're done. But as I mentioned,
oh, no.
we have one more book I want us to look at. Okay?
How could that be? We looked at everything.
We looked at everything in this earth. In, I don't know if it was 2015, I think 2015, possibly 2014, DC started this series called DC Bombshells. So, really quick, on one foot, as we say, DC Bombshells was originally a line of statues, sculptures of various DC superheroines, often in rather suggestive cheesecakey imagery. For whatever reason, DC...
They're supposed to look like pinup girls.
Right, they were supposed to look like...
40s and 50s.
Yes, thank you, yes. So...
The kind of thing, if you were in World War II in the trenches and you would go back to your barracks or your bunk,
right,
you have a poster
hanging
of Jane Mansfield or Marilyn Monroe or something like that.
Right. So DC decided that having their superheroines look like pinup girls wasn't enough. They were going to go back and actually write a whole series. And DC Bombshells basically imagines an alternative history where all of the modern DC superwomen, not specifically superwomen, but like all the superheroes, are heroes in the 1940s fighting in World War II against Hitler in Germany. So basically, rather than just making them passive pinup models, it turns them into active fighters in the trenches. Really cool series, but I want to bring us to DC Bombshells number 17, published in 2016. So go ahead and pull it up, take a look. In the meantime, I'll let you know that this is Uprising Part 1, The Battle of Berlin, written by Marguerite Bennett, with art by Sandy Jarrell and Mirka Andolfo, colored by Wendy Fitzpatrick and Wendy Broom. So we start off in this issue in the Berlin ghetto, 1941, an hour before sunset. And the fact that it's an hour before sunset is going to be important. Now that first page is a lot of people in a house getting ready, it seems to be, for war, getting ready for some sort of big attack that's going to happen the next day, some sort of big assault. But on page 2, we see preparation for a different sort. We see preparation for a Shabbat dinner. Basically, you have these family members sort of gushing over the fact they have real wine and they had wheat to be able to make bread. There's clearly challah on a plate that's being brought. And we see Batwoman speaking to a young girl. And the young girl says, "Are you scared?" Batwoman goes, "Yes." And the young girl goes, "It's just Shabbat dinner," right? Like, what is there to be scared of? Very cute.
Probably a phrase or two that's been said by many of your students who come to Hillel for the first time on a Friday night.
Oh, fair point, right? Like, why be so scared of Shabbat dinner? But like, it could be a scary thing. That's a good point, Henry. Mm-hmm. Right, and then Batwoman's response is, "You're funny, Mamala," right? So she's got that Yiddish touch that's going on. And then basically Batwoman and this young girl talk, and the young woman decides to cheer up Batwoman by letting her know that our women, meaning Jewish women, have been in worse situations than this. And then she teaches Batwoman a prayer, saying, as the prayer says, "May God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah." And then, written out in this comic book in transliteration, Yisimech Elohim Kisara Rivka Rachel Valeah. And Batwoman tries to pronounce it, and this young girl corrects her and teaches her how to say it. And we basically get this incredible blessing that can be used on Friday nights, right? That parents would say to their daughters, may God make you like the matriarchs. Wow.
Oh, Hebrew
Wow.
prayers, Shabbat dinner.
And then this girl goes on to let you know, but that's not all. There's many more heroines for us to remember. She talks about Deborah as a warrior and a prophet. She talks about Judith, right? And Judith is not a book of the Tanakh. It's not a book in the Hebrew.
Right?
It's apocryphal, but it's the story of this Jewish woman that basically seduces and beheads Holofernes, this enemy general. And right, it's like this Jewish woman who saves the day. So she goes through all of these heroines. It's utterly incredible. The young girl insists and says both Judith and her handmaiden, who doesn't get a name, were heroes, which leads to Batwoman asking, well, what's your name then? And the girl says, Miriam Batzel. Miriam, like Moses' sister, she was a prophet too, and they say because of her, no women worshipped the golden calf in the desert. She stayed true and she led other women too. Batwoman's response, you know so much. Yeah, this little girl does.
Yeah.
She's dropping crazy Torah. I looked into this, by the way. So in a Midrashic collection called Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, chapter 46, there is indeed a Midrash where Aaron is delaying the men from building the golden calf by saying, why don't you go ask your wives for their jewelry to make it out of? And basically the women like chide their husbands and are like, why would we do that? We're not going to do this. And according to this Midrash, God rewards the women for their piousness by giving them Rosh Chodesh.
Right. The celebration of a new month, which to this day is like a
Rosh Chodesh. It's a girl thing.
It's like a women's celebration. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't find any Midrash that connected Miriam to this, but definitely that idea of women is there. And
there's that idea that she was sort of the leader of, she was one of the leaders in the desert, and it's possible that she, was a leader of that group of people, who knows?
Right. All right. Now, Henry, do you have the pages in front of you?
I do.
I was hoping, can we read the dialogue back and forth? I'll be Miriam and you be Batwoman, okay?
Sure.
All right. So we're at the top of the page. The Reich. They want me to hate that I am a Jew, but I am proud. What they think is a shameful thing is what makes me strong. I can remember that I come from so much courage and so much strength. They will never make me ashamed.
Where I'm from, I know this is in my blood, but I don't know the words. It's just a part of who I am. I don't know the prayers. I don't know the stories.
That's okay. I can tell you the stories. Maybe there will be stories about you one day.
Or you.
And then someone else at the dinner comes, they go and join the table, and someone says,
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
It seems like they're saying the blessing over the candles, and they're bringing in Shabbat right there on the pages. It's incredible. Now, Henry, I wanted us to read that because, clearly the words are just so powerful. There's so much there about Miriam's pride in being Jewish that's incredible. Batwoman articulating, right, that idea of but I don't know as much as you. And Miriam saying, it doesn't matter because I can teach you the stories. What it actually reminded me of in this really funny way is this pretty famous Hasidic tale that I was hoping I could tell really quick.
Please.
Just because, right, so keep in mind, again, with Batwoman and Miriam says, it's okay, I can teach you the stories. Maybe one day they'll say stories about you. And Batwoman says, or you. So here's the story. When the Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening the Jews, he would go to a certain part of the forest and meditate. There he would say a certain prayer and light a fire, and the miracle would be accomplished, the danger averted. In the next generation, the Maggid of Mezrich would go to the same place in the forest and say, Master of the universe, Ribono Shel Olam, I don't know how to light the fire, but I can still say the prayer. And it was enough. And still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sassov would go to the forest, and he would say, I don't know how to light the fire, and I don't know how to say the prayer, but I know the place, and that must be sufficient. And it was. And still later, generations later, when it fell to Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin, sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he would say, Master of the universe, I don't know how to light the fire, and I don't know how to say the prayer. and I don't know where the place is in the forest. All I can do is tell the story. And it was enough. I don't know if it was intentional, but I really feel like this comic is in conversation with that story.
Yeah.
That you don't have to know the rituals and the knowledge in the Torah. But if you know the story, that story can be enough. And this story, for me, is incredible when it comes to Jewish content.
Yeah. And it definitely clearly is another part of the multiverse because, as we've seen until this point, Kate is very knowledgeable in her Judaism. So it's neat that there's this other version of her where she feels it in her heart and in her soul, but she doesn't know enough. And a little girl teaches it to her.
I wonder, now that you bring that up, Henry, how much it has to do with the fact that this is a Kate living in the 1930s and 40s in America. And the truth is, a lot of Jews at that time were trying to fit in America. And so what that meant was not necessarily being engaged in Jewish practice, because it's more important to be an American. Whereas generations later, right, once Jews make it in America, a lot of later generations look back and are like, wait, what's this culture that I come from? I want to learn more. So I wonder if part of it is I wonder if it's very intentional that the 1940s Kate shouldn't have been as connected because they wanted her to be more American and less Jewish.
It's possible. Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
Wow, right, like what incredible Jewish content in that comic book. Shabbat dinner, wine, challah, all sorts of Torah, blessings.
Yeah.
I mean, we said last week, I don't know if there'll ever be a character that's more Jewish than the Thing. And boom, one episode later, like, this is the most Jewish comic book character I've ever seen right now. I mean, most explicitly Jewish superhero for sure.
To recap, she celebrates Hanukkah with her partner, but not in a superficial way, in a way where her non-Jewish partner really understands what it means to her and what it means overall. She re-inspires a Holocaust survivor with a Jewish ritual object and with her own personal care for the holiday. She understands Kabbalah so deeply that the imagery in her own costuming is a Kabbalistic illusion. And her dad, who's not Jewish, even knows that. Mm-hmm. And she takes part in a Jewish funeral that includes Bruce Wayne, arguably the most popular DC superhero of all time, and in a meaningful way, and again, a way that's not superficial. And finally, she does all those things you just mentioned, Shabbat dinner with all the trimmings.
Now, granted, that's an alternate universe version of her, which reminds us we're dealing with comic books.
Yeah, totally. But here we are. You're right. We talked about the idea of a ranking, a la one of our favorite podcasts that has inspired us, Journey into Misery, where they rank their heroes. But for me, she jumped above Ben Grimm.
Way above Ben Grimm.
Yeah.
Right? Kate Kane is my new favorite superhero.
Yeah.
Like, doing this research, reading these stories, has given me a love for this character that is so incredible because I see myself on the page in a certain way, right? Just by seeing a Jew who's proud and who's knowledgeable and who integrates that Judaism sort of seamlessly into her life, but has a whole rich life aside from it. Like, it really is just incredible.
I want to say that I understand the gravity of two cisgender white men talking about a character who is an out LGBT identified person, and for us, her Jewishness is really important. Could you tell me, Brandon, a little bit about what you were saying to me earlier about what she means to all sorts of folks?
Right. I mean, I think we want to recognize that. I think for a lot of queer and LGBTQ readers, Batwoman is very much a role model and a hero, and that character is theirs, right? And that is 100% true. And for us as Jews, we also feel an affinity and a kinship with her and feel a sense of I don't want to say ours, but like, we see ourselves in her. And I can only imagine that for individuals who identify as both queer and Jewish, this is like pay dirt, right? Like this is themselves on the page, and this becomes so incredibly important. We talked about getting into this, but we might as well acknowledge recently Batwoman was cast in the DC series of TV shows. Yeah. Originally, the casting announcement goes out that basically says, we're looking for a lesbian actress to play Batwoman. And a lot of people on Twitter were responding and saying, like, that's great, but don't forget she's Jewish. Why are you not looking for a Jewish actress? And really, this is an issue of representation. We're really glad you're looking for a lesbian actress, but if you want to capture who Kate is, then that should be a Jewish lesbian, right? Which, like, really incredible sort of asking for that. And eventually there was a hashtag on Twitter, hashtag Keep Kate Jewish. That was all these people that were sort of really excited. And of course, Ruby Rose gets cast and ends up being this controversial decision because I believe that she doesn't, although she's queer, I think she prefers not to identify as lesbian. So some people were upset by that. And she's also not Jewish. And there are a lot of articles about this. And in Moment Mag, they were asking the question of whether or not a Jewish actress should be playing this role. And I just want to read a quick excerpt from that I think talks a lot about what we're looking at. So in this article in Moment Mag, a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Michael Morgan, says that the problem in part is that certain minority groups, quote, are so underrepresented that a single representation comes to stand for everybody. A Jew whose only Jewish trait is celebrating Hanukkah is, as Beale suggests, technically realistic, but the overall lack of Jewish characters leads to more anxiety about specific individual representations. This anxiety is made worse by the fact that other characters who are Jewish in the comics, such as Ray Palmer, have had their Jewishness entirely erased on television. Because Kate Kane is one of the most identifiably Jewish characters in DC Comics lineup, fans are more concerned about how she is portrayed, right? So this is just sort of an emphasis on how important representation is. And to your original point, Henry, Kate Kane is not just a Jewish character, nor is she just a queer character. She's a Jewish queer character. That is her intersecting identities. And that's what makes her as amazing as she is. And so as someone who's Jewish, I can identify in part with her. We can identify in part. And as you said, as two cisgendered white Jewish men, there's only so far we can identify with her. Yeah. And we want to acknowledge that obviously she's got this incredible queer experience and identity that we can't fully relate to, but I sure as hell appreciate it. Like, I love the fact that we have this queer Jewish woman.
Representation in comics matter. Hugely. And every time something like this happens in the comics, this is incredibly important. It is incredibly good for comics. It is incredibly important for kids to see this stuff, for kids to buy comics, and frankly for adults who are still buying comics to see that representation matters.
Right, and a diversity of representations, because as it said, this is how we get away from tokenism, right? As it mentioned in the article, the more Jewish characters there are, the less weight there is on each individual character to represent all types of Judaism. The more queer characters there are, the less weight there is and the less fear there is that this character has to get it perfect or else there's this bad representation of queer identity, right? There should be a diversity of representation, right? It's not enough to just have a black character. There should be multiple black characters. Not enough to just have a Muslim character. There needs to be a whole plethora of Muslim characters. Representation matters.
This was amazing. I love talking about Kate Kane.
We could talk about her for hours and hours.
We have been talking about her for hours and hours.
Lucky you, you're going to hear an edited version.
Yeah.
This was amazing. As we said, incredible character. Can't wait to find out who we're going to talk about next time. But until next time, everybody, I'm Brandon Bernstein.
I'm Henry Bernstein.
No relation.
You
can follow us on Twitter at Jewish Comics Pod, on Facebook at facebook.com/Jewish Comics Pod, or you can email us at jewishcomicspodcast@gmail.com.